The Galactic Archive's Great Hall buzzed with nervous energy as the most brilliant minds from across 17 star systems gathered around the Void Cipher, a mysterious crystalline structure that had confounded scholars for over 3 millennia. Dr. Zethkora, the Archive's chief xenoarchaeologist, flexed her 6-fingered hands as she addressed the assembled experts. "The precursor civilization left us this puzzle before their disappearance," she announced, her scaled voice echoing through the chamber. 31 centuries of study by our greatest minds have yielded nothing. Today, we make one final attempt before sealing it away permanently. The Void Cipher stood 3 meters tall, its obsidian surface covered in complex geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow when observed directly. Quantum mathematics equations floated in holographic displays around it, the accumulated work of millennia. Supercomputers the size of buildings hummed in adjacent chambers, their processing power dedicated to cracking the enigma. Among the assembled scholars, the cybernetically enhanced Vorthan with their quantum brains, the collective-minded Zephyrians sharing thoughts instantaneously, the ancient Kelthran whose lifespans allowed them to contemplate problems for centuries, sat one human. Dr. James Mitchell looked distinctly out of place in his simple cotton shirt and jeans, surrounded by beings wearing sophisticated neural interfaces and biomechanical augmentations. At 42 years old, he was considered barely more than a child by galactic standards. Most species didn't even begin serious academic work until their first century. "Dr. Mitchell," Dr. Zethkora addressed him with barely concealed skepticism. "Your species was only admitted to the Galactic Council last year. Are you certain you wish to participate? This puzzle has defeated minds far more experienced than yours." James simply nodded, pulling out a worn ballpoint pen and a paper napkin from his jacket pocket. The assembled scholars exchanged glances of amusement. The Vorthan delegation's leader, Enhanced Prime Nexus 7, activated his quantum processors with visible disdain. "Primitive tools for a primitive mind," he commented, his artificially modulated voice dripping with condescension. For the next 6 hours, the galaxy's finest minds attacked the problem with everything at their disposal. The Zephyrians formed a mental network spanning their entire home system, processing millions of calculations simultaneously. The Kelthran drew upon centuries of accumulated wisdom, their crystalline memory matrices glowing with stored knowledge. Supercomputers generated trillions of permutations, while quantum computers explored probability fields across multiple dimensions. Meanwhile, James sat quietly in the corner, occasionally scribbling on his napkin with his simple pen. He ignored the complex mathematical models and holographic displays, instead staring directly at the Void Cipher itself. As the other scholars grew increasingly frustrated, James suddenly stood up, his napkin covered in seemingly random doodles and basic arithmetic. "I think I've got it," he said quietly. The hall erupted in dismissive laughter. Enhanced Prime Nexus 7 cybernetic, I focused on James with mechanical precision. "Impossible. Our quantum processors have explored every conceivable mathematical approach." James walked to the Void Cipher, his napkin in hand. "That's your problem. You're all thinking like computers. But this wasn't made by computers." He pointed to a sequence of patterns on the crystal's surface. "These aren't mathematical equations. They're emotions. The precursors weren't trying to create a logical puzzle. They were expressing feelings." Dr. Zethkora's scales shifted color with skepticism. "Emotions? How can you possibly deduce that?" James held up his napkin, covered in simple sketches alongside the equations. "Look at these patterns. This one here, it's not a geometric formula. It's loneliness. This spiral? It's hope. And this broken line? It's grief." He traced his finger along the crystal's surface. "The precursors weren't leaving us a test of intelligence. They were leaving us their story. They knew they were dying out, so they encoded their last thoughts and feelings into this crystal. James pressed his palm against a specific section of the void cipher, following the emotional pattern he'd identified. The ancient structure began to glow, its patterns shifting and rearranging themselves. Suddenly, the chamber filled with ethereal music, not heard but felt, resonating with emotions that transcended species barriers. Images flickered in the air, the precursors in their final days, their civilization fading, their love for the universe and hope for those who would come after them. The void cipher dissolved into points of light that swirled around the chamber before settling into each being present, imparting knowledge not of technology or mathematics, but of compassion, curiosity, and the bittersweet beauty of existence. As the lights faded, the assembled scholars stood in stunned silence. Enhanced Prime Nexus 7's quantum processors struggled to classify what they had witnessed. "How?" Dr. Zethkora whispered. James folded his napkin and tucked it back into his pocket along with his pen. "Sometimes the most complex problems have the simplest solutions. You all focused on what the precursors were thinking. I focused on what they were feeling." He smiled as he walked toward the exit. "On Earth, we learned long ago that the heart often sees what the mind cannot." The greatest minds in the galaxy watched a simple human leave, carrying nothing but a pen and a napkin, having solved in hours what they couldn't solve in millennia.